Hey guys, this is Cody. That sounds like a drum. Cadence Independent Media Productions. And today we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on snare side heads. Specifically, we're going to take all the other variables of tuning out of the equation and just make kind of dramatic adjustments to the snare side to inspect how it affects the sound of the snare drum. So what we've got today, again, is Ben's Supraphonic 70s 5x14. Beautiful old drum, sounds great. And what we're going to do today is we're going to leave this batter head where it is, which is sort of at a medium-high pitch. And what we've done is put a brand new snare side head on the bottom of the drum, and we haven't actually pitched it up enough even for it to conform to the bearing edge yet. Some of the screws are actually below finger tight, and this is just kind of where, again, it ended up from getting the hoop level, which, you can check out that process in our original episode 1 snare video. So what we're going to do is, ignoring the pitch of the bottom head, whether we're talking about each tuning lug or the head overall, we are going to slowly bring the head up, and I'm going to do quarter turns and then retension the wires so that they sit, flush on the head, and sort of discover how much of an effect the bottom head has on the drum. Because Supraphonics are versatile and kind of quality instruments, there's going to be a lot of usable sounds in this range. But this also is designed to illustrate that each of the heads has a huge impact on the sound of the drum. And sometimes you can just change one of them and achieve a really different sound rather than thinking that you need to make huge adjustments to both sides of the drum if you want a different tuning. So for just a reference of where the pitch of the batter head is, I'm going to mute the bottom head with my hand and just play the batter a little bit, just to kind of give you an idea of where we've set it at. Now, we'll get the wires on and just kind of see what it sounds like in this range. I'm making sure not to over-tighten the wires or choke the drum, but they're definitely engaged. They're not loose and flopping around, despite how it might sound. So the bottom head is extremely loose. There are a couple of spots along the edge of it that I can almost feel a little bit of a wrinkle. And I did just level it. I didn't tune it. So there are some wild overtones because the bottom head is so low, it's actually making some of its own kind of pitchy craziness that's coming up through the top of the head. And now it's got some good crack to it. It's kind of fat, but it's also a little bit messy, and it doesn't have a lot of brightness in the snare. So this is an interesting sound for if you don't want the sound of the wires, rather, to be super crispy and brittle. But there's still a fair amount of attack here. So you can get kind of a sound that in my mind is a little older or more kind of crunchy and vintage sounding, just by pitching down the snare side head some. And you can experiment with this with any drum and just kind of see what it's going to give you. Next step is just going to flip it over and go in the star pattern again. You can watch the old video and see how that goes, to just bring the bottom head up a quarter turn and then check it out again. So we brought the bottom head up, and this means that if we want to have the same tension on the snare wires, we're going to have to tighten them a little bit. And as you can hear from this drum right now, the wires are looser because we've brought the head and the rim away from them, which has reduced the pressure on the strings and on the wires from below. A quarter turn is not a lot. It makes a pretty big pitch differential on the bottom head, but it doesn't actually move the hoop that much. So it still sounds good without even tensioning the wires at all. So this is a little bit tighter sounding, but there are also some wild overtones in the edge because of changes that have happened to the bottom head as we're tensioning it up. There's starting to be some dissonance in the edge, which you can probably hear. And if I were to get rid of that, I would do a little bit of adjusting to each lug on the bottom head to try to even out its pitches just a little bit. And I might end up doing that to the top head too. But rather than doing that, we're just going to go up another quarter turn and see what happens next. So now we've gone up a half turn from where we started, and probably the most dramatic change that I'm hearing here actually hasn't got anything to do with the wires right now. It's how much more tone there is in the drum now that the bottom head has been raised up. When it was that low before, it didn't have enough tension on it to promote the resonance of the batter head back up through and make a big note. And now we haven't changed the batter head at all. It has a lot more sound coming out of it and a lot more resonance at this tuning just from changing the bottom head. Now, probably the most surprising part about this particular series of adjustments we did is we only went half a turn on the snare side head, and to my fingers now, it's extremely tight just from that much. And before, it was pretty sloppy. I think I could have put a dent in it with my finger if I'd pressed hard enough. And now it feels pretty tight. Not tabletop tight, I can still move it a little bit, but it's hard now. And I think if we were to go another quarter to a half turn, it would probably choke the drum out in a way that wouldn't necessarily give it the best tone. But there's only one way to find out. So we're going to try it again. We're going to go up another quarter of a turn just to be safe, see what happens. I went ahead and checked the heights with the ruler since the concept of a quarter turn is sort of an imprecise measurement. And pretty much we're in the ballpark still. Things have stayed put. And now we are into where it's like hard to press into the head and get it to move at all. I'm not pressing very hard, and I wouldn't recommend doing that either because you can put dents in the bottom of the head. A lot of times when you take your bottom head off, you'll see marks from when you were setting it on the stand, just where like the little hands from the stand have bumped into it. So since we just listened to it a moment ago with the wires off, I want to do that again so you can hear that the pitch has changed, even though I haven't changed this head at all. And there's a lot less tone now. And this is telling me that this particular pitch relationship is stifling some of the resonance. And I know that if we raise the batter head up a little bit, they would start to work together a little bit better again and make a little bit more of a note. But right now, we're into a zone where the drum is getting choked out a bit from the snare side head, but there's still some tone in the top. And I think it's going to be a very cutting kind of Stuart Copeland sort of sound once we turn the wires on. That actually sounds pretty good. I don't think that I would go much higher than this for the snare side head. Further than this, some of that satisfaction in the feel of hitting the drum really hard starts to go away as it starts to choke out. And it'll also start to make the lighter stuff that you do have a little bit less character because the heads aren't interacting with the wires in such a nice way. The reason that we're doing this is because an awful lot of people have written us to say, I'm really excited to experiment with the snare side head because I was always just told that you should tune it up as tight as it'll go, and then that's what you do with the snare side head. And I really feel kind of opposite about that. I feel like experimenting downward with the head is going to tell you more about your drum. And I think that cranking it up is absolutely a valid sound if that's the sound you want. But as a rule, I think that experimenting in this span between finger tight and like a turn and a half at most is probably all that you need to worry about. The actual span of exciting pitches in the snare side head is a little narrower than the batter side head. You can really go super low with the batter side or extremely high too and have them still kind of function. But because snare side is so thin, it's a little bit narrower of a set of options. So check in next week. There's going to be a second part to this where we keep the snare side cranked and we experiment with the batter head and see what happens in terms of like what ranges are usable and what it does to the overall sound of the drum. And as usual, if you like what you see, please comment on the video, give us a like, please subscribe, and tune in next week because there's a lot more to do.